Welcome back, everybody. Hope you had a good break, got some coffee, some caffeine into your system, so you are ready to go for the next two sessions that we have in store for you. So let's jump into it directly. Very happy to have with us two real supply chain experts from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville, Professor Thomas Goldsby and David Demers. Both come with excellent pedigree in supply chain expertise. So we're very happy to be having them with us. And David and Thomas, please take us through your presentation, and there will be a poll at the end of it, and we will have 10 or 15 minutes at the end for question and answers from the audience. So please, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you. Odit, thank you very much. I will kick us off here. First, on behalf of the University of Tennessee and Tom and I, we're very appreciative and thank you for the opportunity to be present here today. And I would like to introduce the topic that we're in. It's a fairly large topic. We recently completed a study in the area of agile resiliency, and the topic we have described here is advancing end-to-end agile resiliency in supply chains. We will provide resources and information about the study that we've done, and it'll be available to all participants in the session. And also we're available for in the questions and answers. We really encourage you to participate in that area. Tom, would you start us?
Thank you very much, David, and thank you again to the organizers at GPCA for this opportunity. It's wonderful to have this window of time with you to discuss a topic that we started researching well before the pandemic. Back when agility and resilience were something of perhaps luxuries, as opposed to essential aspects of conducting business throughout the pandemic. And of course, as we all know, having these capabilities is essential to thriving and surviving into the indefinite future. But it's also my great pleasure to be working alongside an expert in Mr. Demers, David Demers, who brings vast experience from many different corners of the world and many different corners of industry. And so I've very much enjoyed learning from him, and we're delighted to be sharing some results of our research with you today. Speaking of research, we'd like to start off with a single data point that was gathered from McKinsey & Company almost a year ago, while we were just starting to get into the throes, the depth of the pandemic in July of 2020. McKinsey observed that 93% of supply chain executives plan to increase resilience across the supply chain. And that is a very large, robust number. However, when David and I saw that number, we questioned the other 7%, frankly, that felt that they had enough resiliency in their supply chains. I was wondering what they knew that the rest of us didn't. But 93% is a remarkably high number. And if we were to go back to July of 2019, I would have been curious as to what that number might have looked like almost 2 years ago, pre-pandemic. But as we speak of the end-to-end supply chain, it is essential that we recognize that a supply chain does not begin at your receiving dock and end at your shipping dock. Rather, every organization here has suppliers who perhaps have suppliers all the way back to raw material extraction. And many of you in petro and chemical industries recognize that you're very close to the beginning of the supply chain there. We're dependent upon those resources that you're extracting that then get refined and processed into a multitude of products that we use, consume, experience. And it's that end-to-end perspective from raw material extraction to end usage. And as the previous session also indicated, with an emphasis on sustainability, we're also increasingly looking to close the loop on our supply chains, looking for opportunities to reuse, recycle, remanufacture, refurbish, and so forth. So there are ample opportunities also to close the loop and not merely have a supply chain that stretches from end to end, but also to be thinking about the circuitous flow from time to time. So I was very encouraged to hear that. But it's important that you recognize where you reside within the supply chain, how you create value, and how you depend upon others and others depend upon you. And that really helps to frame our discussion today with you about end-to-end supply chain agile resiliency. If you can pardon me for just a moment, I'd like to offer some rather textbookish definitions of supply chain agility and supply chain resiliency. Supply chain agility represents a company's ability to quickly adjust tactics and operations within its supply chain. And what you'll notice is this speaks of a company's ability to create options for itself, to create various avenues by which they can be served upstream in the supply base, by the supply base, and also how they can serve customers downstream, but to create options. Supply chain resiliency, on the other hand, is stated as the supply chain's ability to be prepared for unexpected risk events, responding and recovering quickly to potential disruptions, to return to its original situation or grow by moving to a new, more desirable state in order to increase customer service, market share, and financial performance. And of course, after reviewing these two definitions, I think everyone here would agree that you'd like to have both of these. The question before us is, can you be agile and resilient? And David and I are here to tell you absolutely yes, you can. In fact, agility is a very vibrant form of resiliency. And we're going to talk about what it means to achieve end-to-end agile resiliency in the supply chain. So David's going to take you into the work that we've completed to date. And as he indicated, we very much encourage your questions as well as perhaps your involvement to help us advance this concept moving forward. But David, over to you.
Good. Thank you, Tom. So the origin of our study actually happened in March. We were getting some suggestions from practitioners saying, can you help us figure out what we should be doing from a readiness standpoint for supply chain disruptions? And with that in mind, we crafted an effort that really drew upon the expertise of experts around the world who helped us look at this topic area and provide us with advice. Tom, if you move to the next slide. Next slide, Tom. There. So in approaching it, we didn't want to do an academic, purely academic study in this area. We really wanted to go after that practitioner's handbook, if you would. And in the design of the study, we had 6 sections in there. And we're going to focus on 3 of them today because of our time limitations. But the study looked at first, how do we connect the supply chain to the boardroom, and how do we define value, and what's the impact of COVID on value creation in our supply chain? We'll dive deeply into that. The secondary was around leadership, and one resounding message that we got back was that we need to have clarity of the roles and responsibilities during disruption periods, as well during periods when we're getting ready for disruptions. And so the study provided a level of understanding on what you should be doing in that area for leadership. Third area we looked at was what kind of capabilities do we need to be able to have greater resiliency in the middle of a disruption. And then we had a case study, which we'll share the results in today. And then the other areas we're looking at, how do I get started in building a blueprint? And then finally, how do I continue to learn about best practices and ideas for building resiliency? Next slide. So let's tackle first the area around value creation. And as was said earlier in the kickoff to our event here today, supply chains now are really are called to the boardroom to provide greater contributions to the shareholder and customer value. And so in looking at value and defining it, we did a series of analytics that looked at 4 outcome areas: capital and working capital in particular, customers and customer performance, cost and margin and profit, and growth. And you'll note on there that there are 3 metrics underneath each of the capital, cost, and growth areas. Those metrics are metrics that the supply chain doesn't own, but has a significant contribution in. And then in the customer area, we're looking at essentially response time, predictability, and fill rate. And we couple that into perfect orders. On the shareholder ones, capital, cost, and growth, there are available databases through Thomson Reuters, the provider of our choice, who look at all publicly traded companies, and we access those databases to provide a view into performance. Before I get into the data on it, I'll share that in a moment, I want to raise the bar really in terms of what we need to be providing. What we're suggesting here is that supply chains have to balance all 4 outcomes and create a competitive advantage over their peers in their industry vertical. So you see in there the word balance, and that is very hard to do during a COVID period. And you also see in there that there's a quartiling or ranking. In order to create competitive advantage, firms have to perform in the 1st and 2nd quartiles. And those that are in the 3rd and 4th quartiles, the orange and red, they are underperforming the industry peer group. Now, I think the best way to kind of come into this data view is to look at the actual numbers. And I'm going to bring you into two areas that we thought were very important from our point of view. The first one was, what was the impact of COVID on these shareholder metrics among chemical companies around the world? And second, what's the distance between those that have a strong competitive advantage and those that are operating at a disadvantage? To complete the work in this area, we looked at 20 of the largest chemical companies around the world. They represent all of the geographic areas. And we focused on diversified and specialty chemical companies. The names are familiar. We included companies from the Gulf area too as well. Tom, if you can move forward. Okay, so first stop on looking at these numbers. Those green arrows that you see there are indicative of firms that were able, groups that were able to add value during the COVID period. And the red arrows indicate where performance slipped during the COVID period. So to complete the analysis, we looked at the 4 quartiles of COVID, which were quarters 2, 3, and 4 of 2020, and quarter 1 in 2021, versus the prior year, the prior 4 quarters, to see what the delta differences are. And within that, within those numbers, you have some pretty interesting results in there. You see that firms in the first quartile, they have a significant advantage over their competitors. They were able to grow revenue during the COVID period by 16.4%. And I'd like to contrast that with those that are in quartile 4 which are at significant disadvantage. And there, the benchmark is just a slight loss in revenue, 0.2% in revenue. So in spite of COVID, you can see that 3/4 of the group were able to add revenue during that time period. Return on supply chain assets is a very interesting and important metric. It may be new for you. It's essentially looking at working capital, the inventory and receivables that we have in cash flowing in our supply chain, against the profit margin, the EBITDA that we generated during that period. And you can see that for all groups during the COVID period, they all created value. But what's important, I think, here is the distance between those that are in top quartile at 17 versus those in the bottom quartile at 4. So there is a very strong opportunity for developing the right capabilities to deliver a high return on supply chain assets, even during a disruption period. Inventory was an interesting one. You can see that during the course of COVID, inventory actually stayed fairly stable across all of the performance groups, and we were somewhat surprised with that. In other industries, inventory grew because of COVID, but in the chemical industry, we did a great job in stabilizing our inventory area. Cash to cash is essentially the free cash flow period from the time in which I take cash out of my wallet for buying materials, building the product, putting it into inventory, and then selling it and collecting the cash back to our customers. And you can see that in quartile 1, the top performers were able to actually improve their cash to cash cycle time, reducing it by over 8%. And again, on a bottom quartile, we were, the underperformers were at 2.3. Bottom line, when we look at EBITDA that was discussed this morning, in the industry, within the 20 firms that we looked at, all of them provided improvements in their EBITDA despite the impact of COVID, which is a pretty amazing outcome overall. Tom, can we look at the next slide? Now, just a quick cut on this. You can see the distance. These are the actual numbers, and we see that top performers had a 68% return on supply chain assets, and the underperformers had a 33.8% difference. There's a very large delta you can see across these metrics that we just examined before. The distance between the guys that are running, the folks that are running superior supply chains, and those that are underperforming. So there's a lot of room and distance for improvement in there for firms in this area. I'd like to spend more time, but we're a little tight, so I'm going to jump to the next slide if we can. Now, I'd like you to think about this as a blueprint or a vision for the kind of capabilities that we will need to add to be resilient going forward. And there are 10 that were identified by the group. We have great detail in the study that you can look at your leisure, but let me give you kind of the highlights of these 10, the headlines, if you would, on these 10. First, and these are not in rank order, and they are interdependent. So let me bring you through what the group told us that they think we need to be able to win. First, we need to really focus on agile resiliency metrics. If you think about these are like, on the shop floor, we have a control system where we can monitor how well we're doing. In this case, we want to have diagnostic metrics that allow us to probe the performance of our end-to-end supply chains. And they give us an early warning system, if you will, of problems. Two, we have, second, the idea of leadership. Leadership has to be in place in and out of disruptions, because we need to be investing in capabilities that allow us to deal with disruptions. Third is command center. And we found a very strong correlation here with both the digitalization that has been discussed earlier, but also the ability for teams of people to be able to have actual visibility into predictive and reactive analytics, to be able to have decision tools associated with it, and to be able to make very, very rapid decisions. This command center goes above the digital platform that we're all describing and wanting over time. Next, firms that responded told us that we need to really re-examine our end-to-end workflows and look for constraint points and design in there resiliency factors associated with that. And then the fifth one was having tools. I'd like you to think about this as though you were our teams, our pit crews. They find a constraint in a disruption period, and they have the methodologies and tools to quickly change out and make the necessary corrections in the operating system to be able to perform at a top level. Next, we talked earlier this morning about event management. The group in the study said we need to proactively have event practice runs and readiness runs available for teams to be well-skilled in dealing with disruptions before they occur. The next area is a very careful examination, number 7, on network designs. These are, normally we use optimization tools to design our networks. Here we need to build in what-if capabilities in our networks before the disruptions occur to understand what the impact of that disruption will be. And the 8th one that was identified is the ability for manufacturing to quickly change the fixed fence on production, and for the sensing of demand to come in hours or days, not in weeks or months. So this area here is really probably one of the most important areas between the partners on the horizontal supply chain. And then the next two are intuitive. They are all about people. And in this case, working with our external partners to align and integrate our processes and our performance measurements and so on. And lastly, while we organize in functions, we really need to organize in periods of disruption around horizontal workflows. So the group identified the need to really invest in our teams in this area. Lots to do in this area. I'd like you to think about it as a continuum, but the study provides you with detail on what your vision or blueprint might look like. Tom, next. Now, is this reality? We went back and looked at a benchmark of firms that are performing in this area. And we have one case study that really rose above all other ones. This is a CPG company. They're very well known. They're global in their scope. And this is the same view of that performance diamond. Here, we looked at 16 companies within the CPG industry. And in this case study company, you can see their performance. They are in the top tier, quadrant 1 on 6 of their metrics that we just discussed. And then they have 2 in quartile 2 and 1 straddling into quartile 3. What's important here is 2 things. One, the density around the advantage position that they've succeeded in. This is during COVID. They maintained their position, and the green indicates that they actually increased their value performance during the COVID period. The red 2 dots on there indicate that they declined, or they had increases, for example, in inventory and in their price earnings ratio. I think what's interesting in this cut is the correlation on the next slide. we went back and did a maturity model around those 10 capabilities that I highlighted with you. And you can see that in this particular firm, they have 75 to 100% of that capability in place in almost all of the 10. And you can see in their ranking of priorities, this is what they're looking at right now in terms of improvement. These are ongoing improvements in those capabilities, capability areas. So we were excited to see that actually those that embrace this capability portfolio that we've identified can actually deliver superior performance in their area. And also, I'd like you to think about this as a continuum over time. This particular firm has been working on this for the last 3 years. They anticipated disruptions were going to be a problem, and they began to invest in these areas 3 years ago, and you can see what the benefits now have derived for them. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Tom, and he'll take us forward.
Very good. Thank you, David. And so we recognize that this might seem overwhelming. It's a lot of information, and as Dave indicated, the case study, a lot of work for the company to achieve varying levels of capability across these 10 areas. And we'd like to ask you a question at this point as we're about ready to conclude our remarks and open the floor to questions. But we have a question for you in the form of a poll. And so we would be curious about how ready you feel that your enterprise is for advancing supply chain agile resiliency as a strategic capability priority. And so if we could invoke the poll, you see that we have 5 options here, varying assessments of your readiness for advancing supply chain agile resiliency. So ask for you to ponder that based upon how we've described supply chain agile resiliency from end to end across those 10 capabilities. And so as you're pondering your response, we will ask that the poll be launched. And I will offer that we have conducted this poll in a variety of settings, so we'll be interested in comparing your relative assessments to those that we've seen in other settings. And David, while we're waiting for the poll to be initiated, I think it was important to underscore across those 10 capabilities the interdependent nature of them. A question that we sometimes receive, and perhaps I'm taking a question that will be directed to us momentarily, is where one should prioritize. As we all know, strategy is about making choices, deciding how to allocate scarce resources. And so David, maybe you can offer a little commentary in how you've responded to the question of prioritizing across those 10 capabilities.
No, thanks, Tom. I think the first thing that we need to do in any industry vertical like the chemical industry, and I've spent 15 years now working with chemical companies, is to identify where the constraints were during the course of any disruption, COVID being one of many. And that first step of identifying the constraints in terms of shareholder and customer performance, and then diving into the operating system design, will really inform us on where we should prioritize our capability areas. The backside of any constraint is what kind of capability do I need to override that constraint? And we really need to get organized. If we don't get organized, we tend to sharpshoot in on what we think might be important. And oftentimes what happens is we fix a constraint only to find that another constraint overrode the capability that we put in. So we really need to get organized in the way in which we approach this. Start with the diagnostic and then work toward the prioritization. But those 10 capabilities, they apply across all industries. The configuration and applications will be different, but the 10 categories of capabilities are all important.
Very good, David. And it seems as though the polling is not working as we might have expected. However, each individual out here viewing this hopefully has had the opportunity to assess their own readiness of their enterprise. David, I'm going to turn it back to you. What would you have expected to have seen out of this based on the experiences of conducting this poll question in other settings?
Yeah, I think that, it would be in the fairly ready area. We all survived COVID with hard work, and certainly the financial performance numbers for the chemical industry shore that up. The real question, I think, though, is disruptions are coming more frequently, the impact is deeper, and the duration is longer. And therefore, we need to think about systemic investment to be ready for disruptions as a core competency.
Excellent. Well, as we are concluding, here's the poll. Well, fantastic, and perhaps we can share the results. And David, it's remarkable that the results are as you prescribed. That the fairly ready response, almost half of viewers indicated that response, 47.4% to be precise, with the next response being the so-so, the not so certain, but moving in that direction, 26.3% of response, 21.1% of response not very ready, and 5.3% indicating not at all ready. So with regard to the very ready, at the high end of the extreme, no one felt that they were ready to conquer any and everything that they might face into the indefinite future. But that fairly ready is consistent with your own expectations and indicates a very positive attitude moving forward. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. Yeah, I think what we see emerging is over time that readiness for disruptions needs to be a core competency of the organization. And there'll be more and more pressure on firms competitively to be able to have that capability to actually take market share or improve their performance in the gap between they and their competitors. So the race is on. It's not just a COVID problem. It's the ability to be able to handle disruptions as a core competency.
Well, as I heard in an earlier session today, it is a journey, and it's not something to be accomplished overnight. And I see that Udit is joining us, and I would just again thank the organization GPCA for this opportunity, and also extend an invitation to collaborate with David and me, the University of Tennessee and Avicon, as we advance this concept and seek to make it a reality across more organizations. And that means helping us conduct the next generation of agile resiliency research, also engaging in agile resiliency benchmarking and best practice endeavors, looking to apply agile resiliency in learning designs for individual and team deployment certification. And also at the University of Tennessee, we host the Global Supply Chain Institute and the Supply Chain Forum, which are great opportunities to learn from folks like David and myself and the rest of the team. So indeed, I believe we do have a few minutes remaining for questions. So we welcome any and all curiosities out there.
Thank you both, Thomas and David, for some excellent insights. That case study was really on point with the session topic, but also the theme of the event. And let's dive into some questions, as you mentioned. So looking at the poll results, were you at all surprised to see that nobody selected fairly ready or very ready, sorry? I was actually happy nobody selected that. But let's hear from you.
It's interesting. That indicates that we're not in a complacent state of mind, and I think that's very important. I love the references earlier today to the state of mind in which we find ourselves. And you can often look to organizations that feel as though they're on top of the heap, And sometimes complacency can naturally set in that circumstance. And I don't think that it'd be wise for anyone to be feeling as though they have this figured out. It is certainly a work in progress. And David, would you concur?
Yeah, I think we also looked at 3 other industries in our study, and clearly there's a very small minority who feel like they're at the top of the curve, the learning curve on this. But all of them indicated that they were going to invest. And it was in the core of those 10 areas that people saw important priorities coming forward.
Right. Thank you. It's a second question that comes to my mind is about the chemical industry in specific, because you zoomed in on that in your presentation and your study. What are the common challenges that you see faced by the chemical industry if you look at that industry in specific?
Mm-hmm.
When
well,
compared to your study, that is. Yeah.
Yes, yeah. The traditional areas that we are all familiar with, the cyclical nature of our business cycles, and the ability to be able to have profitability, to be able to move across different products in the production wheel very, very quickly to optimize profitability and keep the plant running in spite of disruptions in the demand patterns coming up. So the agility in that area to sense changes before they occur, and then for manufacturing in the ability to respond to quickly change that production fence to be able to handle and accommodate keeping the plant running, but building the products that are going to be profitable where they can actually sell that inventory during the period. And then lastly, I think across all of the industry sectors, including chemicals, the constraints that we have often appear either downstream with a supplier or in the relationship we have with our customers. And in the keynote, there was a discussion around segmentation of which customers to protect and grow value. I completely support that. And it was evident in all the industries we looked at that everyone had to rationalize who to protect and how to then tier the customer performance so that they could retain their customers. For many industries, they looked at this as an upside opportunity to take market share. And I think that's an important idea here. If we're really good at this, then it's an opportunity for us to actually bring new revenue and new customers to us based on our capabilities.
Okay. I'll just add that agility
comment.
can sometimes seem like a foreign concept in process industries, particularly those that require intense capital expenditures where the pursuit of efficiency is of the utmost importance. But as I've come to appreciate, agility means creating options for yourself. Even if you have a rather fixed production process, looking for opportunities for degrees of freedom, and that can sometimes be found outside of the execution, but in areas like planning, looking for opportunities to shorten planning cycles as an example. So I think that we just have to look to some uncommon sources of agility and look to leverage wherever we can create more options and degrees of freedom.
Thank you. And gentlemen, just to wrap the session, because we're coming to an end of our time. If I were to put a poll in front of you and there would be 2 choices, which one is more important to achieve these goals, technology or people? Which one would you choose?
That's a very hard choice. I personally, I think it's people, because in the end you can have the best technology, but unless your team is ready to play in this new game that we have, then the technology will be not valuable to you. So the first building block would be getting people ready and then deploying the technology over time. that would be my recommendation.
I would agree. And again, maybe my investment of people might create the technology that I need. So maybe that's a bit of a cheating on your question, but
Yeah.
I would agree. It's people that think, it's people that execute. Ultimately, it's people that get the job done. So if forced into that that circumstance, I would choose people. But obviously, organizations are looking to invest in people, process, and technology to achieve the agile resiliency that we spoke of today.
David and Thomas, it's been a great pleasure having you with us. Thank you so much for your contribution and for sharing these amazing insights with us. I wish you all the best. We will obviously be in touch and look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Take
very
care.
much.
Thank you. Bye.